11 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and start. Good morning. The June 7, 2023 virtual meeting of the Anne Arundel County Council is now in session. We are here today to continue our work on the proposed FY24 budget for the Anne Arundel County, Anne Arundel County Council, Anne Arundel County, I should say. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Ms. Pickard.
Present.
Mr. Volkey.
Present.
Ms. Hummer.
Present.
Ms. Fiedler.
Present.
Ms. Radvian.
Present.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Present.
Ms. Bolaire.
Present.
Mr. Chair, we do have all 7 council members and the county auditor in attendance. I'll also note that we have our legislative counsel here in case you have any parliamentary type questions.
Okay, thank you. At this moment, we are now going to hear from the county executive proposing additional amendments to the budget today, otherwise known as a supplemental budget. And today I will now turn it over to Mr. Chris Trumbauer, who is the budget officer for the county. Mr. Trumbauer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you referenced, I'm Chris Trumbauer. I'm the county budget officer. On behalf of County Executive Stuart Pittman, I'm pleased to introduce the supplemental budget amendments to the council today. You should have in your possession a copy of the supplemental letter. I believe you also have a copy of the draft amendments that correspond with the summaries in the letter. Mr. Chair, I can do this one of 2 ways. I can run through the entire letter, or I can hit the highlights and the points of interest. It's up to the council. I think I heard you say you want me to just stick to the highlights.
No, but I was going to say, has any of the council members not reviewed the letter that was presented to us this morning? Who has not had an opportunity to review those points? Okay, seeing no hands, so I think it's probably appropriate to do the sort of wave tops, big points, and at the end leave an opportunity for council members to bring up any specific ones that they may have questions about.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably most of this is technical and corrections for errors and things like that, but I will spend a little time on the highlights, as you mentioned. So we'll just go through the letter. We're going to start with errors and omissions. The first 3 that you see, these are simply reconciling funding for 2 positions. The budget book had the positions in the right spot, but the funding was in the previous departments. So these amendments fix that. Also in other funds, there is a carryover funding for the Laurel Race Track Impact Aid Fund. So now we'll get to the important stuff, the supplemental budget amendments for operating budget. You'll see that there is, as we had mentioned, there's the Board of Education amendment for $3.1 million to provide an increase in teacher starting salaries. This would be enough to bring all new teachers and teachers on steps 1 or 2 up to the current level of step 3. I will note to the council that this amendment will be conditionally appropriated. So that funding is contingent on the Board of Ed and the bargaining unit reaching an agreement to adopt that change. Also, we have $120,000 additional for consulting services for the Police Accountability Board. That would live in the Chief Administrative Officer budget.
I don't know why that echo was there. Real quick, before you move off the Board of Education item, you said contingent on some ungodly reason, there wasn't a condition met with that. Does that fund like go back to a fund balance, or does it stay?
It would revert back. Yes, Mr. Chair, it would revert back to the county, and it would be part of fund balance. So that appropriation is conditionally appropriated to the Board of Ed. So that money only travels to them if those conditions are met.
Understood. Thank you.
We've got a couple other questions. I'll leave it up to the council, but do you want me to roll through everything, or do we want to spend a minute talking about this?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's probably I see, it's topic specific so that, people have these thoughts in their head and line of questioning. So it might be appropriate to address it now, because if we were in the chambers, they would probably have that line of questioning right at this moment, if that makes sense. So I see Amanda, Ms. Fiedler, if you want to go ahead and speak.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. Mr. Trumbauer, with that 3.1 million moving over to Board of Education, I believe salaries and wages, if there's any portion of that 3.1 million or any other leftover money in salaries and wages, that is what we typically see in the fourth quarter transfer when the Board of Education has reallocated that unused funding and needs to basically pay the bills at that point in time. Is that correct?
Well, so this funding would only go to the board if they meet the requirements. So it wouldn't, they can't spend part of it, but not all of it, right? So this appropriation in its entirety is for a specific purpose, which is outlined in the amendments. And if those conditions are met, then they get that appropriation. So there wouldn't, there's no room for them to come up with a partial agreement that only gets some of the funding, which then would trigger the situation I think you're talking to. So this is an all or nothing.
And if they don't meet those requirements or meet that agreement, what then would happen?
So at the end, if those conditions aren't met by the end of the fiscal year, it reverts back to the county. So the budgeted amount will show in the budget that you all pass, if we presume you pass this amendment, that 3.1 million will be included. If at the end of the year they never meet their conditions and that money is not conditionally appropriated, that money will revert back. And when you see the actuals for fiscal year 24, it will not include the 3.1 million going over to the Board of Education. That will be retained in the county's general fund, and it would then at that point be part of the 2024 fund balance for that fiscal year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Volkey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Trumbauer, just a question about somewhat maybe unintended consequences with this. So I fully understand the county executive's idea of raising teacher starting salaries to be competitive with surrounding jurisdictions. I think, did you say that this will take starting teachers to step, did you say it was 3?
Yes, the current salary for step 3.
Okay. So I guess from an equity standpoint, right, because we have heard this a lot, this council has, when the council does things where we sort of move someone, but we don't move someone else, does this in any way adjust for teachers who are in year 1 or year 2 now, who are then, what's their pay going to look like vis-a-vis these new teachers coming in? Like how does this all fit together? Because I don't want to unintentionally create sort of these inequitable disparities where teachers who are on step 2 think they're moving to 3, but then a brand new teacher is making the same thing. So now they say, well, I feel like I've fallen 2 steps behind because the new teacher is right where I was, as opposed to me being further ahead. So
sure, good question, and something that we've thought a lot about, obviously. Let me first say that the county, we do not bargain with the bargaining unit, the Board of Ed does, and those conversations will need to happen. But I will tell you from the county administration standpoint and in our conversation with the school system, what this amendment allows is that the lowest salary, the minimum salary for teachers would move to $58,161. So that means that new hires would be at that amount. That means that if you would have been a step 2 teacher, you now also get that new amount. So no one will make less than this new starting salary. Now, what that does do, Mr. Volkey, is it does present a pay compression issue, which the school system is aware of. And that is something that I think our expectation, and I'm sure their expectation is too, that they would work to address that compression issue in the next fiscal year. But what we view as a benefit for this plan is that the bargaining unit already has a tentative agreement for the 8% pay package that we include in the proposed budget. This is all on top of that. So it doesn't take away anything from anybody else. All it does is move those minimum salaries up. And then there will probably, to be candid, there will probably need to be additional considerations given not only to compression issues next year, but also the way that the blueprint bill is incentivizing the different salary structures in terms of the career ladder and everything else. So that is a longer term conversation that I'm sure that the school system and the bargaining unit will be undertaking, if that answers your question.
It does, and I thank you for that. I think that was a very transparent answer, which is you all have thought about it and you can see there are issues and somebody else is going to have to solve them. We're just writing the checks. But I hope that anybody who's watching from the school board, I see Councilwoman Rodian wants to jump in too, but anybody watching from the school board, I just think if they can try to solve that, I don't think our intent as a council when passing this supplemental budget is to create those problems. So certainly we may have to fix them, but it'd be nice if they could solve them without coming back and telling us how we then created another problem for them, because that's not what we're trying to do. That's all I'll say from my point of view.
Sure, and I'll just, I guess, wrap up this conversation by saying we have been in discussion with the school system. They've talked to the board of directors or their board of education. So this is new additive money to address an acute need, and I think that the compression issue is something that will be tackled in the future. But this is obviously a net benefit for those teachers at the lower end of the salary scale without taking anything away from any teachers above that level. It does, as we've acknowledged, it does create a bigger compression issue, but we see that all the time and we find ways to deal with it. So I think we'll be learning more about this in the coming days, but this money will only be appropriated to the board if that condition is met. So this is to raise, very specifically, to raise starting teacher salaries to a competitive level. That's what this money is for.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Chair, shall I move on?
Yes, sir. No, please proceed. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, so the next series of amendments are specific to council requests that we've been able to accommodate. As you'll see in the letter, there is funding for a new captain position in the sheriff's office. There is the $530,000 that were identified in the auditor cut for the library. We are putting that back so that the library system can add that to their salary enhancement effort. And then the $130,000 in the auditor cut to the health department, we are putting that back so that the school health nurses can have that as an additional 1.25% COLA on top of the compensation that was already in the proposed budget. And then finally, there are 10 new positions in the police department, 10 sworn positions. That's 5 new police officer positions and 5 new police sergeant positions. So those are all new positions. And I'll just note that those are then added to the previous 13 sworn positions we had in the proposed budget. So that's 23 new sworn positions for the police department. On the next page, a couple of reconciliation amendments to do the things we just mentioned. But also there is some additional grant revenue coming into the Community Development Fund and the Grant Special Revenue Fund for Board of Election Supervisors, Office of Central Services, and the Health Department. So that's all for the operating budget. The capital budget is obviously much more complex because there's different funding sources and impact fees, and we've got different years and all of that. So I'm only going to hit what I would say the substantive amendments here. Most of what you'll find in the capital budget supplementals are technical adjustments or funding swaps. So I want to start by on page 4. If you look at letter C, where we summarize the supplemental requests, the auditor cuts and other amendments that were adopted yesterday account for $8,187,000 of general county bonds and pay-go reduced. Okay, so then the subsequent amendments we're going to roll through now, that fund is what is going to allow us the additional funding to appropriate these supplemental amendments. So that table is on top of page 5, and that's just a summary. But if you look at the bottom right corner, that ties into the $8 million number I just mentioned. Okay, so let's go through these. On CIP General Fund, in the general county class, we are recognizing some additional state funding for the fiber optics. We can move on to page 6, and we will see in Rec and Parks, there's some funding swaps and technical changes, but the things I want to highlight are we're adding $500,000 into the Greenways project, and this is intended to be a pay-go contribution to the city of Annapolis as it looks to expand the acquisition of the Elktonia Cars Beach parcels for conservation. So the city of Annapolis would be purchasing this, and this is a contribution the county would make towards that. Also, at the council's request, we are updating the project description for the West County Swim Center. The new language will remove the province's park and insert language that says the site for this facility is currently being determined through an updated planning study. And I want to give some props to Council Member Smith and also our Department of Rec and Parks for engaging in those conversations with Fort Meade, looking at alternative locations. And then finally, adding $1 million of county bonds to the Lake Waterford project. And this would be an all-season air-supported tennis court enclosure. Colloquially, we call that a tennis bubble. Moving down to roads and bridges class, there's a couple projects here that we've just gotten new information and updated bids or updated costs, so we're adding money. That's what the story in the Town Center to Reese Road project. But then here on road resurfacing and road reconstruction, we're adding a total of $2.75 million to both of those projects combined. This was a council request that we were able to accommodate. This is about a 10% increase in capacity to those projects, and that will be countywide. And then similarly, we're adding $200,000 of county bonds to support a design feasibility study for the Shore Acre Sidewalk project. And this will allow the public outreach to begin on that project as well. And if all goes well, we will see a subsequent standalone project for that come in a future year. Moving down this list on Magathie Bridge Road, we've got increased project costs, so we're adding money there. And then the other one I wanted to highlight was the Conway Road improvements. We're adding some language there that indicates that we will be we'll be studying the opportunity to provide additional access between the Two Rivers community and Route 3. So that'll be a long-term project, but something that we understand through the council is an important issue for the community. And then I'm going to move on to education. So this starts on the bottom of page 7. And let me just lay this out. Generally, there's a lot of money moving around here, but this is largely reconciliation from updated IAC funding or moving around impact fees. And there's also some reversions from the Board of Ed. So if you look at page 8 on the BOE reversion, the Crofton Area High School project is now closing, and we're recapturing $1.95 million. You can see in the table below, this is where those reversion funds are going. They're going into security-related upgrades, school furniture, athletic stadium improvements, and driveway and parking lots. So that is how that money is being reshuffled. And then you can see the table below that. There is some updated grant funding that we're getting from the state as well. So that brings us to the final thing I wanted to highlight, which was a supplemental amendment for the community college capital. This is $250,000 of general bonds in 24 so that they can do some enhancements to their tutoring center renovation in the Glen Burnie Town Center. That was also a council request, so thank you for that. And let me just conclude by saying that the current expense budget supplemental request general fund total is $6,151,100. $5,234,600 of that is recurring. $916,500 is one time. This supplemental request uses $5,251,100 of recurring general fund operating budget reductions from yesterday's amendments and $900,000 of one-time reductions from amendments that were approved yesterday. So that's a long way of saying that we present to you these supplemental budget amendments. This maintains a balanced budget. It maintains our capital budget under the affordability guidelines, And I think we were able to accommodate pretty much all of the council requests. So I will leave you with saying, we think this is a great budget. Thank you for your work and the auditor's work and the Department of Budget and all the departments in making what we think was a good budget even better. And we look forward to working with you over the next week to answer any questions as we lead up to final budget passage on June 14th. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you for the information. Quick question on the Baybrook or the BWI connector. There was some district. What was the total?
So that was just those were some funds moving around, but that was unconnected to the amendment that the council passed yesterday. So that this incorporates the amendment you all passed, but we would have needed to do this anyway, even if that amendment hadn't passed. It's just some funding swap based on new information.
Understood. All right, I see Ms. Robian. See your hand up.
Thank you. I really just wanted to say thank you to the county executive and to you, Chris, Mr. Trumbauer, for figuring out a way to set aside $500,000 to purchase the additional land for the Cars Elktonia Beach project. That is a very important project to many of my constituents, and I think it will be a huge asset to our community. So thank you for working to make that happen.
Thank you.
I see Ms. Fiedler. Over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amanda Fiedler, District 5. I do want to thank my colleagues. This has been a very different experience. Almost feels like my first budget. There was a lot of communication. I want to thank the administration for discussing the Shore Acres sidewalk project, and I think we came to a really good compromise. My question is, and I have to thank transportation because I really chipped away at Mr. Sneed to get down into the details of that project. The order of action now would be feasibility, design, community outreach. Just want to make sure I have that order correct.
I think that's probably right. I would suggest you follow up specifically with the director to confirm that, as I am just a meager budget officer. But the intention here is if we can get a head start on this project and do kind of that front end feasibility work, that would allow this to be brought in a future year. It would kind of move it up the line. So I would defer to Mr. Sneed or his department on the exact timeline of what public outreach would be.
Great, thank you.
All right, any additional comments from the council on the remarks so far by the budget officer? All right. So I'm going to read a portion here that needs to be read as well. So under section 709 of the charter for Anne Arundel County, if the county executive proposes amendments to the budget so as to increase items in the budget or add items to the budget, the county council must give reasonable public notice of the proposed amendments and hold a public hearing on the amendments, unless the county council waives the requirement for a public hearing. It takes 5 votes to waive this public hearing. So may I have we've obviously been submitted a supplemental here. And while we will have an opportunity for the public when we have our in-person meeting to also go over these, but for the sake of the process, we will require a motion to waive the public hearing required by section 709 of the charter. So is there a motion to waive the public hearing required by section 709 of the charter?
Motion to waive the public hearing, Allison Pickard.
Is there a second?
Second, Julie Hummer.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Volkey,
Aye.
Ms. Hummer,
Aye.
Ms. Fiedler,
Aye.
Ms. Rodvian,
Aye.
Ms. Ledbetter,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
and Mr. Smith.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to waive the public hearing required by the charter has been adopted.
All right, the motion to waive the public hearing required by section 709 of the charter has passed. So a hearing will not be held. However, public notice and copies of the supplemental budget will be provided on our website following this meeting. Is there any other business to be brought before the county council at this point? And Mr. Trumbauer, thank you for your due diligence. It's always a pleasure to work with you during this process and previously, but you definitely have made this a pleasure, at least, my first time dealing with you. I know some of the other council members have had that opportunity in the past, but may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Allison Pickard.
Is there a second?
Rodvian second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. The county council is adjourned until 10 a.m. On Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. We will meet in person in the county council chambers to vote finally on the entire proposed FY24 budget. Thank you. That's it. Short and sweet. I will see you all on the 14th.
Good job.
Thank you.